Dr. Eliza Morgan wiped the sweat from her brow as she carefully extracted the daguerreotype from its protective case. The summer heat in Savannah was particularly oppressive today, making the air in the university's archival room feel thick and suffocating despite the air conditioning. As the head of the Historical Preservation Department at Savannah College, she had handled countless artifacts, but something about this particular item made her fingers tremble slightly. "How old did you say this was again?" she asked, glancing up at her research assistant James. "According to the donation records, it's from 1847, found in the attic of the Blackwood estate when they were clearing it for demolition last month." James leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper despite them being alone in the room. "The estate agent said none of the workers wanted to touch it, called it cursed, or something equally ridiculous." Eliza rolled her eyes. "Superstitious nonsense. Though I must admit, the preservation is remarkable for its age." The photograph showed 7 young women arranged in a semicircle on the porch of what appeared to be a grand southern mansion. They wore identical high-necked dresses, their hair styled similarly with middle parts and tight buns. What struck Eliza as unusual was the clarity of their faces. Daguerreotypes from this period typically required subjects to remain perfectly still for extended periods, resulting in stiff poses and blurred features. But these women's faces were unnaturally sharp, their expressions frozen in what could almost be described as dread. "Let's get this digitized immediately," Eliza said. "I want to examine it more closely." Later that evening, Eliza sat alone in her office, staring at the high-resolution scan on her computer screen. Something about the photograph had been bothering her all day, a detail she couldn't quite place. Zooming in on the women's faces one by one, she studied their features. The first 5 showed varying degrees of the same emotion, a resigned sort of fear. But when she reached the 6th sister, she gasped audibly. The young woman's eyes weren't focused on the camera like the others. Instead, they were looking directly at her sister to the right, the 7th woman, and in those eyes was pure, undiluted terror. Eliza's finger hovered over the trackpad, hesitating before zooming in on the final sister. As the image enlarged, the room around her seemed to grow colder. The 7th sister's face was different from the others, her lips curved into the faintest smile, her eyes possessing a darkness that transcended the monochrome limitations of the photograph. They seemed to stare directly out of the screen, meeting Eliza's gaze across nearly 2 centuries. A sharp knock at her office door made Eliza jump so violently she knocked over her coffee mug, sending the dark liquid spreading across her desk. "Sorry to startle you," James said, poking his head in. "Just wanted to let you know I found some information on the Blackwood family. Apparently, they were quite notorious in pre-Civil War Savannah. The father, Edmund Blackwood, had 7 daughters who all supposedly died on the same night in 1847, the night this photograph was taken." Eliza's blood ran cold. "Died? How?" "That's where it gets strange. According to newspaper archives, they were found in their beds the next morning, no signs of violence or illness. The official cause was listed as cessation of vital functions, which was basically Victorian speak for "we have no idea." Eliza turned back to her screen, where the 7th sister's eyes still seemed to follow her movements. "Did they have names?" James consulted his notes. "Yes, all biblical names. Mary, Elizabeth, Ruth, Rebecca, Sarah, Hannah, and the youngest was Lilith." "Lilith," Eliza murmured, staring at the 7th sister's face. "That's not actually a biblical name. It's from Jewish mythology, Adam's first wife, who refused to submit and was cast out of Eden." Interesting choice then," James said. "Anyway, I'm heading out. Don't stay too late." After James left, Eliza found herself unable to look away from Lilith's face. On an impulse, she sent the image to print on the department's high-resolution photo printer. Something about examining it digitally felt insufficient. The printer hummed to life, and Eliza walked over to retrieve the glossy 8x10. As the image emerged, She noticed something strange, a dark smudge in the background that hadn't been visible on her screen. Taking the print back to her desk, she grabbed a magnifying glass from her drawer and examined the anomaly. It wasn't a smudge. It was a figure standing in the doorway behind the sisters, tall, indistinct, more shadow than substance, but unmistakably human-shaped. A cold shiver ran down Eliza's spine as she realized it wasn't present in the original daguerreotype. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Stop looking." Eliza's hand shook as she set down her phone. She grabbed her keys and the printed photograph, suddenly desperate to leave the empty building. As she hurried through the darkened hallway toward the exit, the overhead lights flickered briefly. She quickened her pace, the sound of her footsteps echoing unnaturally loud in the silence. In the parking lot, Eliza fumbled with her car keys, dropping them twice before managing to unlock the door. Once inside, she locked the doors and sat for a moment, trying to calm her racing heart. The photograph lay face down on the passenger seat. Despite her better judgment, she reached for it, turning it over slowly. Lilith's face had changed. The smile was wider now, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp, too numerous. And the other sisters, their expressions had shifted from fear to something closer to warning. Their eyes, previously focused on the camera, now seemed to look directly at Eliza. She dropped the photo as if it had burned her and started the car. As she pulled out of the parking lot, she glanced in her rearview mirror. For a split second, she thought she saw a figure standing in the doorway of the building, a woman in a high-necked Victorian dress. By the time Eliza reached her apartment, she had almost convinced herself she was being ridiculous. Lack of sleep and an overactive imagination, fueled by too many horror movies. That's all this was. She tossed her keys on the kitchen counter and headed straight for the shower, hoping the hot water would wash away the lingering unease. As steam filled the bathroom, Eliza caught a glimpse of something in the fogged mirror, what looked like handwriting appearing in the condensation. She froze, watching as invisible fingers traced 7 words. "You shouldn't have looked so closely, Eliza." Her heart pounding, Eliza quickly wiped the mirror clean with a towel, telling herself it was just a trick of the light. But as she stepped into the shower, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Later that night, as Eliza lay in bed trying to sleep, her phone chimed with an email notification. It was from the university's automated security system, alerting her that someone had accessed her office using her keycard at 11:47 p.m. That was impossible. Her keycard was right there on her nightstand. She called campus security immediately. "This is Dr. Morgan. I just received an alert that someone used my card to enter my office, but I'm at home and have my card with me." "We'll send someone to check right away, Dr. Morgan," the security officer assured her. "Stay on the line." Eliza heard the officer radio a colleague to investigate. After a few tense minutes, she heard the other guard's voice crackling through the radio. "Office is secure, no sign of entry, but there's something weird on the computer screen. Looks like a photograph." "What photograph?" Eliza asked, her mouth suddenly dry. "Can't really tell from here. Just 7 women in old-fashioned dresses. Screen keeps zooming in on them one by one." Eliza felt the blood drain from her face. "Get out of there, now!" "Ma'am, just get out!" she shouted, already reaching for her clothes. "I'm coming there right now." By the time Eliza arrived at the university, 2 campus security guards were waiting outside the history department building. Their faces looked pale in the harsh parking lot lights. "Dr. Morgan," the older of the 2 greeted her, his voice strained. "We've secured the building, but..." "But what?" Eliza demanded. "The computer in your office shut down on its own after Officer Collins left the room. When we tried to turn it back on, it wouldn't boot up. And..." he hesitated. "We found this on your desk." He handed her a small, aged piece of paper. It was a handwritten note in faded brown ink. "7 sisters bound by blood and oath, one betrayer among the fold. Look not upon her wicked face, lest you join our eternal hold." "Where did this come from?" Eliza asked, her voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't there when I first checked the office, Officer Collins said. I swear it. I stepped out for maybe 2 minutes to radio back, and when I returned, it was sitting on your keyboard. Eliza felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. I need to see my office. Dr. Morgan, I don't think that's a good idea. Please, she insisted. I need to understand what's happening. Reluctantly, the guards escorted her to her office. Everything looked exactly as she had left it, except for one detail. The daguerreotype case was open, though she distinctly remembered closing and locking it before leaving. Did either of you touch this? She asked, pointing to the case. Both guards shook their heads. Eliza approached cautiously and looked down at the photograph. Her breath caught in her throat. The arrangement of the sisters was the same, but their positions had shifted slightly, as if they had moved while being photographed, and Lilith, the seventh sister, was now staring directly at the camera, her smile wider than before. This isn't possible, Eliza muttered, reaching for her phone to take a picture of the altered daguerreotype. But when she reviewed the image on her screen, it showed the sisters in their original positions. I need to find out more about these women, she said, more to herself than the guards, and about the night they died. The next morning, Eliza drove to the Savannah Historical Society, desperate for answers. She'd barely slept, her dreams haunted by 7 pairs of eyes watching her from the darkness. The archivist, an elderly woman named Ms. Pembroke, seemed unsurprised by her interest in the Blackwood sisters. We get a request about them every decade or so, she said, leading Eliza to a dusty corner of the archives. Always after that photograph resurfaces. Eliza stopped in her tracks. What do you mean, resurfaces? Ms. Pembroke gave her a knowing look. That daguerreotype has a history of disappearing and reappearing throughout the years. Last time was in 1997, when a graduate student found it in a box of donated items. Before that, 1978, when renovations at the old Blackwood property uncovered it behind a wall. She pulled out a thin file folder and handed it to Eliza. This contains everything we have on the Blackwood sisters and the circumstances of their deaths. It's not much, I'm afraid. Records from that time are spotty at best. Eliza opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside was a collection of newspaper clippings, handwritten accounts, and what appeared to be pages from a personal journal. The topmost item was a yellowed newspaper article dated August 17th, 1847. Tragedy strikes prominent Savannah family. The 7 daughters of Edmund and Margaret Blackwood were found deceased in their beds yesterday morning, sending shockwaves through Savannah society. No cause has yet been determined for this unprecedented tragedy. The young women, aged 16 to 23, had posed for a daguerreotype portrait the previous evening to commemorate the engagement of the eldest, Mary, to Jonathan Mercer of Charleston. Funeral services will be held at St. John's Episcopal Church on Thursday. Beneath the article was a handwritten account from a housemaid who had worked at the Blackwood estate. I was the one who found them, God rest their souls. All 7, laid out in their beds like they were sleeping, but cold as ice they were. No marks upon them, no sign of struggle. Only Miss Lilith had a look about her, a smile that weren't natural. The master had the photographer come the night before, and they was all in fine spirits, except for the youngest. Miss Lilith never did smile much, but that night she was different somehow. I heard her whispering in her room before bedtime, though she was alone. When I asked who she was talking to, she said, "My true sister." Gave me chills, it did. Eliza continued reading through the documents, her unease growing with each page. According to various accounts, Lilith had always been considered the odd one among the sisters. Withdrawn, preferring solitude to society, often found reading books on subjects deemed inappropriate for young ladies of that era. But it was the final document in the folder that made Eliza's blood run cold. It was a letter written by Edmund Blackwood to a Dr. Thaddeus Winters, dated just 1 week before his daughter's deaths. My dear friend, I write to you in strictest confidence regarding a matter of grave concern. My youngest, Lilith, has been exhibiting disturbing behaviors these past months. Margaret insists it is merely the temperamental nature of youth, but I fear something more sinister afflicts the child. She speaks of a shadow sister who visits her at night and teaches her the old ways. I have found strange markings carved into her bedpost, and twice now I have discovered her sleepwalking in the garden at midnight, gathering herbs and mumbling incantations in a language I cannot identify. What troubles me most is the effect she appears to have on her sisters. They have grown pale and listless in her presence, though they deny any ill treatment from her. Mary's engagement seems to have worsened this behavior. Lilith openly declared that no sister shall leave before I do. I recall your work with the asylum in Charleston and wonder if you might visit us to assess whether institutional care might be warranted. I fear for the harmony of my household and the safety of my family. Yours in distress, Edmund Blackwood. Eliza closed the folder, her mind racing. This was beginning to sound less like a ghost story and more like a historical case of family dysfunction, possibly involving a mentally ill young woman who may have poisoned her sisters. But that didn't explain the changing photograph or the message on her bathroom mirror. Is there anything else? She asked Miss Pembroke. Any record of what happened after the deaths? The archivist hesitated. There is one thing. Though it's not officially part of our collection, my grandmother worked here before me, and she kept a private record of certain incidents related to the Blackwood case. She disappeared into a back room and returned with a small leather-bound book. This is her personal journal. She documented 3 separate occasions when people researched the Blackwood sisters and then met with unfortunate accidents shortly thereafter. What kind of accidents? Eliza asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. A historian in 1923 who fell down a flight of stairs after publishing an article about the sisters. A photographer in 1967 who attempted to recreate the daguerreotype using descendants of Savannah families. He drowned in the Savannah River. And the graduate student I mentioned from 1997, she was found in her apartment, no signs of trauma, no medical explanation, just like the sisters themselves. Eliza felt a chill run through her body. What was the graduate student researching specifically? The identity of the photographer who took the original daguerreotype. She believed he might have been practicing some form of early spirit photography, deliberately capturing supernatural entities on film. According to my grandmother's notes, the student found his name just before she died. Solomon Graves. As Miss Pembroke said the name, the lights in the archive flickered briefly. Both women looked up at the ceiling fixtures, then back at each other. Thank you for your help, Eliza said, gathering her notes. May I take photos of these documents? Of course. Just be careful, Dr. Morgan. The archivist's eyes were serious. Whatever happened to those girls in 1847? Some things are better left in the past. As Eliza drove back to campus, her phone rang through her car's Bluetooth. It was James. Eliza, where are you? Something weird is happening with that photograph. What do you mean? She asked, her knuckles turning white on the steering wheel. I was organizing the new acquisitions database and included an entry for the daguerreotype. When I uploaded the scan we took yesterday, the image looked different on the server. Different how? The women have moved. They're standing in a circle now instead of a semicircle, and they're all looking at the youngest one in the middle. And there's something else. There appears to be text scratched into the background that wasn't visible before. What does it say? Eliza asked, already knowing it would be something terrible. It's hard to make out completely, but it looks like Solomon's pact is sealed with 7. Does that mean anything to you? Eliza nearly swerved off the road. Solomon Graves. He was the photographer. I need you to find everything you can about him, where he lived, where he worked, if he had any known associations with the occult. The occult? Eliza, what's going on? I'm not sure yet, but I think we've stumbled onto something dangerous. Don't look at that photograph anymore, James, and whatever you do, don't zoom in on the faces. But it was already too late. As she pulled into the campus parking lot, her phone chimed with a text message. It was from James and contained only a single image, A close-up of Lilith Blackwood's face, her eyes now completely black, her smile revealing teeth that were definitely not human. Eliza ran from her car to the building, taking the stairs two at a time. When she burst into the lab, James was sitting motionless in front of the computer, staring at the screen. "James?" she called, approaching cautiously. He didn't respond. When she touched his shoulder, he slowly turned to face her. His eyes were glassy, unfocused. "She's coming for you," he whispered. "She says you've seen too much." Eliza stumbled backward away from James. "Who's coming for me? James, snap out of it." His expression remained vacant, but his lips moved again. "Lilith says you need to return what was taken. The covenant must be honored." "What covenant? What was taken?" Eliza demanded, her heart racing. James blinked slowly, his eyes gradually clearing. He looked around in confusion. "Eliza, what happened? I feel strange." Before she could respond, the lights in the lab flickered and went out completely, plunging them into darkness. The emergency backup lights kicked on seconds later, casting an eerie red glow throughout the room. "We need to leave now," Eliza said, grabbing James's arm and pulling him toward the door. As they stepped into the hallway, a blast of cold air hit them, so intense it felt like walking into a freezer. Their breath immediately fogged in front of their faces. "That's impossible," James muttered. "It's August in Georgia." The sound of footsteps echoed from the stairwell at the end of the corridor, slow, deliberate steps ascending toward their floor. Eliza pulled James in the opposite direction, toward the elevator. "No time to explain. We need to get that photograph and any research related to it and get far away from here." They hurried to Eliza's office, where she quickly gathered the daguerreotype case, her notes, and the printed photograph. As she reached for the case, she noticed that the daguerreotype inside had changed again. Now the sisters stood in a circle around Lilith, who was pointing directly outward, as if indicating someone beyond the frame. The temperature in the office dropped suddenly, causing the windows to frost over from the inside. On the frosted glass, words began to appear as if traced by an invisible finger. 7 must remain. "What does that mean?" James whispered, his voice shaking. Before Eliza could answer, her computer screen flickered to life despite being powered off. The image that appeared was not the daguerreotype, but a different photograph entirely, one showing Solomon Graves's photography studio. 7 young women in white dresses lay on the floor in a circle, their hands joined. In the center stood a man in dark clothing, his face obscured by the camera equipment. At his feet was a large, ancient-looking book, open to a page covered in symbols. "Oh my God," Eliza breathed. He was practicing some kind of ritual photography. The daguerreotype wasn't just a family portrait. It was part of an occult ceremony. The image on the screen changed again, showing a close-up of the open book. Though the text was in a language Eliza didn't recognize, one phrase at the bottom of the page was written in English. "The vessel must remain sealed by 7 bonds of blood. We need to talk to someone who specializes in occult history," Eliza said, already scrolling through her contacts. "Dr. Abernathy in the Religious Studies Department might know something." As they hurried across campus to the Humanities Building, Eliza filled James in on everything she had learned at the Historical Society. The summer evening was oppressively humid, but they both still felt unusually cold, as if the chill from the office had followed them. Dr. Abernathy was, fortunately, working late. His office was a cluttered space filled with books on comparative religion, mysticism, and folklore. After listening to their story, he pulled several volumes from his shelves. "What you're describing sounds like a containment ritual," he said, flipping through an old leather-bound book. Many 19th-century occultists believed photography could capture not just a person's image, but aspects of their soul or life force. Some experimented with using this principle for various magical purposes. He found the page he was looking for and turned the book toward them. It showed illustrations of ritual circles, similar to the arrangement they'd seen in the changing photograph. This particular ritual was used to bind a malevolent entity, by tethering it to multiple human vessels, spreading its essence so thin that it couldn't manifest its full power through any one person. The ritual required willing or unwilling sacrifices who would serve as the bonds or seals. "The 7 sisters," Eliza murmured. Dr. Abernathy nodded grimly. If Solomon Graves performed such a ritual, he may have used the sisters as vessels to contain something dangerous, something Lilith had already made contact with through her shadow sister. The daguerreotype would serve as both the ritual focus and the physical anchor for the binding. But why is it changing now? And why is Lilith able to reach out? James asked. Bindings weaken over time, Dr. Abernathy explained. And if the daguerreotype is the anchor, removing it from where it was hidden may have accelerated the deterioration. As for Lilith specifically, if she was a willing participant while her sisters were not, she would retain more autonomy within the binding. She would be both prisoner and warden. "So what do we do?" Eliza asked. "How do we stop whatever's happening?" Dr. Abernathy's expression was grave. "You said the Blackwood estate was being demolished? That's likely significant. Sacred spaces have power in these matters. Destroying the location of the original ritual could further weaken the binding. You need to find out if any part of the original house still stands, and you need to return the daguerreotype there." As they left Dr. Abernathy's office, Eliza's phone rang. It was an unknown number, but she answered anyway. "Dr. Morgan?" a woman's voice asked. "This is Claire Wilson from Savannah Historic Preservation. We need to speak with you immediately about an artifact removed from the Blackwood property." Eliza exchanged a glance with James. "How did you get this number?" "Your research assistant provided it when he signed out the daguerreotype from our temporary storage facility. We've been trying to locate that item. It was never supposed to leave the premises. There are precautions that need to be taken with certain artifacts from that collection." "What kind of precautions?" "I'd rather not discuss it over the phone. Can you meet me at the Blackwood site in an hour? Part of the original structure remains intact, and I believe that's where the daguerreotype belongs." After agreeing to the meeting, Eliza hung up and turned to James. "Did you sign anything when you collected the daguerreotype?" He shook his head. "No. The estate agent just handed it over in a box with some other items. There was no paperwork, no facility. Something's not right about this call." Eliza felt a chill run down her spine. "We need to go to the Blackwood estate, but not to meet this Claire Wilson. If Dr. Abernathy is right, returning the daguerreotype to its original location might be the only way to strengthen the binding and stop whatever's breaking free." The Blackwood estate was located on the outskirts of Savannah, now surrounded by modern developments, but still retaining an air of faded grandeur. Most of the mansion had indeed been demolished, with only the front facade and entrance hall still standing amid construction equipment and debris. Yellow caution tape surrounded the property, but no workers were present in the evening hours. Eliza and James ducked under the tape and approached the remaining structure cautiously. "This must be where the photograph was taken," Eliza said, looking up at the deteriorating porch. "The sisters were arranged right here, over 175 years ago." As they stepped onto the porch, the air around them seemed to thicken, making it difficult to breathe. The daguerreotype case in Eliza's bag grew noticeably heavier, pulling at her shoulder as if drawn downward. "Do you feel that?" she whispered to James. He nodded, his face pale in the fading daylight. "Like something's watching us." They entered the partially demolished entrance hall. Despite the summer heat, their breath fogged in front of them. The walls, stripped of wallpaper and lath, revealed the bare structural timbers of the old house. "Look," James said, pointing to one of the exposed beams. Carved into the ancient wood were symbols similar to those they had seen in the book on Dr. Abernathy's screen. Eliza traced the symbols with her fingers. "This is it. This is where the ritual took place, not in a photography studio, but right here in their home." She removed the daguerreotype case from her bag, her hands shaking slightly. If returning it is supposed to strengthen the binding, where exactly should we put it? As if in answer, a floorboard creaked behind them. They turned to find a woman standing in what remained of the doorway, elderly, dressed in contemporary clothing, but with an unsettling familiarity to her features. "You must be Dr. Morgan," she said, her voice the same as the woman who had called herself Claire Wilson. "I've been expecting you." "Who are you?" Eliza demanded, instinctively stepping in front of James. The woman smiled, the expression not reaching her eyes. "My name is Margaret Winters. My great-great-grandmother was Mary Blackwood, the eldest of the 7 sisters." She stepped further into the room, her gaze fixed on the daguerreotype case in Eliza's hands. "Every generation, one of us is chosen to serve as guardian, to watch for the signs that the binding is weakening, to ensure that when the daguerreotype resurfaces, it's properly returned." "You knew this would happen?" James asked incredulously. Margaret nodded. "The binding requires renewal every 7 decades. The daguerreotype always finds its way back into the world when the time comes, seeking someone to complete the circle." "What circle?" Eliza asked, though a terrible suspicion was forming in her mind. 7 sisters bound the entity in 1847, Margaret said, but one was willing. Lilith. She made a pact with Solomon Graves, believing his promises of power and knowledge. But she didn't understand the true nature of the binding. None of them did. To maintain the seal, 7 must remain. Always. She stepped closer, her eyes now fixed on Eliza's face. 7 lives were taken to create the binding. 7 lives must be given to maintain it. That's why the daguerreotype found you, Dr. Morgan. You and your 6 colleagues in the Historical Preservation Department. Eliza felt her blood run cold. "That's insane. I'm not sacrificing anyone for some supernatural binding ritual." Margaret's expression hardened. "You misunderstand. The choice is not yours to make. The moment you looked into Lilith's eyes, you were marked. The process has already begun." As if on cue, Eliza's phone chimed with multiple message notifications. With a sense of dread, she checked the screen. Emergency alerts from campus security. 3 of her department colleagues had been found unconscious in their homes, with no apparent cause. "What have you done?" she whispered. "Not I," Margaret replied. "Lilith has already claimed 3 of the 7 she needs. By midnight, she'll have taken the rest, unless you complete the ritual and renew the binding." "How?" James demanded. "How do we stop this?" Margaret pointed to the center of the room, where the exposed floorboards formed a rough circle. "Place the daguerreotype there, and stand within the circle of protection." She handed Eliza a small velvet pouch. "These herbs were prepared according to Solomon's instructions, passed down through my family. Burn them as you recite the binding words." Eliza hesitated, looking at James. "This is crazy. We should call the police, get medical help for our colleagues." "The doctors won't find anything wrong with them," Margaret interrupted, "just as they found nothing wrong with the original 7 sisters. Their life force is being drained to feed what lies beyond the veil, what Lilith invited in. Only completing the ritual will release them and restore the binding." "And if we refuse?" James asked. Margaret's face was grim. "Then by morning, 7 people will be dead, and Lilith will be free to seek a new vessel, one that can fully manifest her shadow sister in this world. The consequences would be unimaginable." With shaking hands, Eliza placed the daguerreotype in the center of the floor. She and James stood on either side of it, while Margaret positioned herself at the edge of the room, beginning to recite words in a language Eliza didn't recognize. As Margaret chanted, the temperature in the room plummeted further. The daguerreotype case opened by itself, revealing the photograph within, now showing the 7 sisters standing in a circle around a dark, indistinct shape. Eliza emptied the herbs from the pouch onto the daguerreotype and struck a match. As the herbs began to smolder, the smoke curled upward in unnatural patterns, forming symbols in the air that matched those carved into the wooden beams. "Repeat after me," Margaret instructed, switching to English. "By blood and bone, by silver and light, We renew the bonds that hold the night. Eliza and James repeated the words. The smoke grew thicker, swirling around them like a living thing. 7 souls to seal the gate, 7 lives to hold the weight. As they spoke these words, the daguerreotype began to glow with an internal light. The faces of the sisters shifted and changed, their features blurring and reforming. What was bound shall bound remain. What was taken, taken again. The smoke condensed, forming a perfect circle around them. Within it, shadowy figures began to take shape, the outlines of 7 women in high-necked Victorian dresses. The price is paid, the covenant kept, the darkness once more shall be contained. As the final words left their lips, the daguerreotype erupted in blue flames that gave off no heat. The 7 shadowy figures moved in unison, converging on the photograph. For a brief moment, an 8th figure appeared among them, taller, darker, with too many limbs moving in impossible ways. The shadows engulfed it, pulling it downward into the burning image. A high-pitched wail filled the air, rising to a scream that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The blue flames shot upward, illuminating the entire room with an otherworldly light. And then, silence. The flames vanished as suddenly as they had appeared, leaving the daguerreotype untouched on the floor. The smoke dissipated, the temperature gradually returned to normal, and the oppressive feeling that had hung over them lifted. Eliza's phone chimed again. With trembling fingers, she checked the screen. A message from campus security. All 3 of her colleagues had regained consciousness, with no memory of what had happened. Margaret approached, looking exhausted but relieved. It is done. The binding is renewed for another 7 decades. What exactly did we just do? James asked, his voice hoarse. You reinforced the barrier between our world and what lies beyond, Margaret explained. The entity that Lilith invited in, that Solomon Graves helped her bind to her sisters, has been contained once more. She carefully picked up the daguerreotype and returned it to its case. This must remain here, sealed within the walls of what's left of the house. My family will ensure it stays protected during the renovation. Renovation? Eliza asked. I thought the property was being demolished. Margaret smiled faintly. Plans change. The Historical Society has suddenly received a substantial anonymous donation to preserve and restore the remaining structure as a historical landmark. As they left the Blackwood estate, the weight of what they had experienced hung heavy between them. Eliza knew they would never speak of this night to anyone else. Who would believe them? 1 week later, Eliza sat in her office, finalizing her report on the artifacts recovered from the Blackwood estate. She had listed everything except the daguerreotype, which officially had never existed in their records. James knocked on her door, looking more like himself than he had since that night. The contractors at the Blackwood site just called. They've sealed the daguerreotype inside the